First, let me say how, and perhaps before I begin, to express my sincere condolence to His Excellency the Governor of Lagos State and the Right Honorable Speaker, as well as the government and people of Lagos State on the terrible disaster that occurred yesterday. And I express my condolence on behalf of Mr. President and also all of the Nigerian people. I pray that we will never again see a recurrence of this type of tragedy. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me begin by saying how very deeply honored I am by this kind invitation to be here. It's an enormous honor to have been invited to speak at all in this place of history. It's history-making place and a place of lawmaking. Just as you have said, the Right Honorable Speaker, I've been here twice before, and as you pointed out, both for confirmation hearings as the Commissioner designate on both occasions, once in 1999 and the other in 2003. Defending budgets, watching presentation of budgets, I'm very often trying to negotiate my way through with the very honorable members of the House of Assembly. But at each and every one of those occasions, the sheer importance of the legislative function as a pivot of our democracy has never escaped. Indeed, as has been said, and I say this and it's not original, of the three organs of government, the place of primacy belongs to the legislature. The function of government begins by lawmaking and is followed up by law enforcement and adjudicatory functions. As such, the legislature is the first organ of government. End of quote. This occasion is an auspicious one, the third anniversary of the 8th Assembly, and it comes at a time of great challenges and even more incredible opportunities for our nation and for this state, which is most populous and the center of commerce, not just for our nation, but also of Africa's largest economy. From the theme, and the theme is strengthening legislative institutions, a panacea for enduring democracy. I have chosen a topic, and I was told that I was allowed to do so by the kind grace of the Right Honorable Speaker. I've chosen a topic which in some sense is the sub-theme of that very broad topic, and it is stronger states and the eradication of poverty. Stronger states, or a stronger state and the eradication of poverty. My reason for this choice is from the recognition of the fact that the legislature is no longer in modern democracies an island. Indeed, it is the crucial gateway and the interlocutor to the most important concerns of those who brought us here. In our case, the Nigerian electorate. Those concerns revolve around a simple issue. That is, how do we survive? How do we make a living for ourselves? How do we make a decent living for ourselves? And how do we ensure that ourselves and our families live stable and secure lives? That is the central question that the electorate poses to us. And that is the central question that occupies the minds of government. And of course, the legislature being at the center of government. Perhaps the most important business of governments today is the creation of an environment that conduces to the reduction of poverty by the creation of wealth, jobs, and opportunities. It's my thesis that the important structural change that we can make in Nigeria is to speedily eradicate poverty. And this is best achieved, in my view, by stronger states, by creating states that are stronger. And when I refer to states, I'm referring to the legislature, which is the center of the state, the executive, and of course the judiciary. Nigeria is a federation of 36 sub-nationals and a federal capital territory. The people, the land, the businesses, the schools, the healthcare facilities are all in the states. It is simply impossible for the nation to be wealthy when its component parts are poor. The standard of living of the federation depends on the standard of living of the people who live in the states. So for emphasis, there are two streams of thought that I intend to advance in the next few minutes. The first is that poverty can be eradicated, that a better standard of living and improved development indices are possible by the actions of states. The second is that to achieve this objective, we need stronger states. What does that mean? What does that concept of a strong state mean? It means two things. The first is what states must do for themselves, what a state must do for itself. By that I mean the three arms of government, especially the legislature and the executive, working proactively and creatively as independent, administrative and wealth-producing economic entities. So, the legislature, working with the executive, must be able to create an environment where the state is proactively an entity, is a proactive economic entity, able to produce wealth by itself, independent of even the federal government and independent of other states. The second is the devolution of more power to the states, enabling the states to control more of their resources and to make more of their own administrative decisions, such as the creation of local governments. The state police, community police, including state penitentiaries or state prisons, the creation of special courts and tribunals, which are equivalent to the high courts that are provided for in the Constitution. The point I'm making is that states must have more powers. States must have more rights. It is important that there is devolution, that there is a concrete devolution of power to the states in some of the ways that I've mentioned. And I'll come back to this point. The phenomenal achievements of the Western Region government of Chief Obafemi in 6 years illustrates how the convergence of the two imperatives that I mentioned earlier can be used to transform the socio-economic destinies of millions. Chief Obafemi, as you know, was Premier of the Western Region from 1954 to 1960. The Western Region is what today constitutes Oyo, Ogun, Ondo, Ekiti, Osun, parts of Kwara and Kogi, and even parts of Edo and Delta at some point, and Lagos as far as Jibo, some parts of Ikeja and Agege. The 6-year period of the Awolowo government is often cited as one of the most progressive of any government in the developing world. Some of the major accomplishments include a major agricultural revolution, government supporting and subsidizing cash crop production, using commodity exchanges to enhance agribusinesses, several farm settlements, several agro-allied and other industries, including the Odua textile industries, Ado Ekiti, Okitipupa oil palm mills, Oluwa glass, Ifon ceramics, Ire Ekiti brick making industry, as well as several industrial estates of farm, including the industrial Ikeja industrial estate. A network of roads across the region, the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, the 26-story Cocoa House, Ibadan, the tallest building in the nation at the time, the Airport Hotel Ikeja, Western Nigeria Television Authority, the first of its kind in Africa, and first even in many parts of Europe, including Belgium. It was ahead of Belgium and certainly ahead of South Africa. But by far the most significant of these achievements is the free universal primary education. In 1952, when the scheme was proposed, 381,000 children, about 30%, were enrolled in school. By 1955, when the scheme took off, 432,000 children were enrolled, and the numbers continue to grow. The government devoted as much as 41.2% of the 1958-1959 recurrent budget to education, at that time one of the highest in the world. At the same time, the region nurtured a vibrant civil service and the judicial system, which is widely acknowledged as a model even today. So how were our phenomenal achievements possible? There was no oil revenue, and there was no federal revenue. In fact, the Western region gave revenue to the central government. How did they do it? How did they do it? Mostly by taxes and revenues from agriculture, especially cocoa. Taxes and revenues from agriculture, especially cocoa. And of course, there were several other cash crops. Education, which was free education, which was audaciously launched by the Awolowo government, was directly on the back of income taxes. A capitation or poll tax was imposed by the Western Region government, mainly to fund free education, despite much opposition and much protest. For those who follow the political history, Awolowo, of course, lost elections in the West on account of his insistence on free education. That kind of political courage is sometimes difficult to find these days. But that is the cost of leadership. The truth is that a combination of visionary leadership and strong autonomous states is a winning formula for economic development. And that is really as simple as it is. Awolowo, of course, was a visionary leader. But he also had a strong autonomous region behind him. And by pushing the resources and by exploiting the resources of the region available to him, he was able to record the phenomenal successes that we celebrate even to this day. But the process of creating stronger subnationals is possible, even without making any major constitutional changes. And I want to emphasize that point, that it is possible to create strong states, even today, without making any major constitutional changes. Of course, in order to get the kind of autonomy that we might need, constitutional changes might be relevant. But even without doing so, it is still possible today to have some level of strength, some level of autonomy, even within our constitution, within our current legal and constitutional framework. In the period from the civilian government of Asiwaju Bola Tinubu, in which I was privileged to serve, to date, the government of Lagos State, working closely with the State House of Assembly, has challenged the federal government and the National Assembly before the Supreme Court in several cases designed to deepen the independence and autonomy of states. And I want to emphasize that it is impossible for the state government by itself, and when I say the state government, I refer to the executive by itself, to do any of those things without the full backing of the legislature, without the full backing of the House of Assembly. And as I go along, I'll explain. The Supreme Court established the following principles in these cases. And I'll just go through the principles established by the Supreme Court because the legislature in Lagos State and the executive worked together and went before the Supreme Court, presented cases before the Supreme Court in order to ensure, and as I said, from that period to date, that tradition has continued. Now, what did the Supreme Court, what were the findings of the Supreme Court that deepened the autonomy and the strength of states? When the Lagos State went to court and won the cases that we went, and the cases that were even up until 2014, and even till date, there are still cases that are going before the Supreme Court. Whenever we win a case, it works for all the states, even those who did not support. All of them are beneficiaries of the victories of Lagos State before the Supreme Court. In fact, they are probably sometimes greater beneficiaries than Lagos State itself. And I'll go through them one by one. The first is that states could, by the law of the State House of Assembly, create their own local governments. And this is very important, that a state can create its own local government by a law of the House of Assembly. However, the creation by law, the state will still have to go a step further by submitting returns to the National Assembly, which in turn will list the new local government areas to be, in the Constitution, to be listed as in the schedule of the Constitution. Now, I want to just make the point that it is because a state can create its own local governments that the Lagos State government at the time took the position that we could hold elections into the LCDAs that have been created. We took that position at the time without any extra law. But in consultation again with the House of Assembly, we agreed that we'll create a special law, which was an LCDA law, which would empower the creations that we had made, the states, the LCDAs that we had made, not only to function administratively, but also to be capable of rendering the sorts of services that local governments were rendering. The important point to be made there is that after the Supreme Court had said that we had a right to create local government, and that our local governments were valid and well created, we have not backtracked from that position since. And even up to today, our state governments are continuing to maintain that very strong position. The second is that the Constitution intends that everything relating to local governments must be in the province of the state government rather than in the government of the Federation. The National Assembly has no power whatsoever under any provision of the Constitution to increase or alter, for example, the tenure of elected officers of the local government councils. Only the House of Assembly of the state has such power. And this is the position taken by the Supreme Court. It is not my view, and I want to emphasize it, so it's not said that I would want to set it. This is what the Supreme Court said. And I say so because very frequently, as we know, we always have these very interesting brickbats between the National Assembly and the Executive. I have to point out, once, and of course, the press like to play games around these conflicts between the National Assembly and the Executive. In fact, once there was a caption in the newspaper that said, while I was acting president, that Osinbajo threatens the National Assembly. And I had to point out that at public events where the Speaker and the President of the Senate were, that if you look at our comparative sizes, it will be a suicidal mission. It will be suicidal for me to even attempt to be threatening those gentlemen. The fourth point is that a state, and this is the fourth point that the Supreme Court held, and I'm going through this, these are over the years, is that the state has exclusive legislative and executive authority over urban and regional planning functions. Even with respect to federal land in states, the federal government must seek building or other development control permits from the state. This is a very important point. It is to the effect that the state has exclusive legislative, that is to say, it is the legislature that can make law on urban and regional planning, and also that even where federal land is concerned, the federal government must seek the consent of states, must seek building permits from states, or must seek other development control permits from states. This is a very powerful statement from the Supreme Court, because it showed clearly the autonomy of the states and the power of the state's legislature, as well as the power of the executive of the state. The fifth is that the president has no power, however good his reasons may be, to seize or withhold the statutory allocation of a state or a local government. That the president has no power, however good his reasons may be. Even if he says, I remember that on the particular occasion when we appeared before the Supreme Court, the counsel on the other side actually asked the question that so if a state governor were to carry on his head the money of the state and was going to go and pour it into the lagoon as soon as he collected it from Abuja, wouldn't the president have a right to say, no, I'm not going to allow you madman to do this thing? We pointed out to the Supreme Court that his madness can only be checked by the State House of Assembly, not by the National Assembly. Fortunately, the Supreme Court agreed with us that no matter how crazy the state governor may be, the president has no right to withhold the funds of the state or the funds of the local government, which of course are in the custody of the state. Permit me to consider the next ruling of the Supreme Court in some detail to demonstrate the extensive powers of state legislatures especially over the supervision of statutory allocations. The case had to do with the monitoring of revenue allocated to local government councils from the Federation account. On the 12th of May 2005, the National Assembly passed a law titled the Monitoring of Revenue Allocation to Local Government Act of 2005. The law established a monitoring committee for funds allocated to the local government, and it required each state to give account of how it expended local government allocations to the Accountant General of the Federation. Lagos State, of course, challenged the law, and some other states joined us. In the lead judgment, the Honorable Justice Nikki Toby took time to explain the practical implications of the principle of federalism in our Constitution. And he said, I quote, he said, federalism as a viable concept of organizing pluralistic societies such as Nigeria for governance does not encourage so much concentration of power in the center. Each of the federating units must be independent and coordinated. Each of them exists not as an appendage of the other, but as an autonomous entity in the sense of being able to exercise its own will in the conduct of its affairs, free from direction by another government. His Lordship contrasted federalism with unitarism, an arrangement where the Constitution, quote, concentrates at the central or national level a very strong central command, making the regions or groups parasitic on the center, in the sense that they do not enjoy any autonomy, end of quote. The Honorable Justice of the Supreme Court then went on to examine the respective powers of the federal and state legislatures, concluding the exercise as follows. He found, he said, 1, considering the provisions of our Constitution, the National Assembly could not exercise legislative powers in matters not included in the exclusive legislative list. The State House of Assembly, on the other hand, can legislate on matters not included in the exclusive legislative list, as well as matters reserved to them on the concurrent list. 2, the only constitutional function of the National Assembly under the appropriate constitutional provision is to allocate to the states the amount standing to the credit of local government councils, whereupon the National Assembly becomes functus officio. In other words, its duties end there. It is the constitutional function of the House of Assembly to distribute the amount. In other words, Section 162 subsection 5 stops at allocation, and Section 162 subsection 8 picks up on 162 subsection 5 to distribute the money, of course, by legislation. The establishment of the State Joint Local Government Committee is the function and responsibility of the government of the state, which is vested with power to maintain what is called the State Joint Local Government Account. And this is by the appropriate provision of the Constitution. The moment a state maintains a special account in the name and style of a State Joint Local Government Account, it ceases to be federal government finance, and the Accountant General of the Federation cannot police the funds. Final point, the rendition of monthly accounts to a federal body in a matter which is within the exclusive domain of the state via the appropriate provision of the Constitution is against the federal structure of the Constitution. And the court concluded that as regards the provision of that law which was passed, which empowered the Auditor General of the Federation to submit a report to each house of the National Assembly of how monies allocated to each state for the benefit of local government was spent. The court held that the Auditor General of the Federation had nothing to do with state funds or state affairs. These are exclusively the functions of the state. The state legislature has also, in the tradition of establishing and pushing the frontiers of federalism by legislation and sometimes by litigation where necessary, has also made great strides. In more recent times, the Hotel Occupancy and Restaurant Consumption Tax Law, which imposes a 5% tax on sales in hotels and restaurants, has been passed by this House of Assembly. And as the House of Assembly passed it, it was challenged by the federal government. And of course, it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declared that the law was valid because matters of hotels and matters of hotels and sales taxes anyway, but consumption taxes within the exclusive province of the state legislatures to make laws. Also, the Lagos State Internal Revenue Administration Law established the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service by state law for the first time. Aside from several structural changes brought about by the law, it granted the LIRS autonomy from the civil service, such that remuneration and disciplinary processes became more business-like. The Lagos State government, through its House of Assembly, has also enacted the Lagos State Waterways Authority Act and also modified the National Inland Waterways Act of 2004 by Lagos State law. That law established the Lagos State Waterways Authority and saddled the agency with the regulation and management of the internal waterways of Lagos State. Now, the Lagos State House of Assembly passed that law pursuant to Section 315 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, which empowers it to repeal an existing law. The Lagos State government has argued that by that provision, it has the power to repeal the National Inland Waterways Authorities Act, which vests the powers over its inland waterways in the National Inland Ways Water Authority. These are consequential legislation which strengthen state autonomy. And I think it's very important to emphasize that time and time again, what the Lagos State House of Assembly has done is to push the frontiers of federalism by passing laws that it believes are within the province of the state legislature to do. And by so doing, it has deepened and strengthened federalism in Nigeria. And these legislations, as you see, several of these legislations have proved to be sustainable. We have not yet found one that the Supreme Court has struck down. Indeed, the courts have upheld practically all of these laws time and time again. Very quickly to the question of eradication of poverty. There is no question that poverty remains one of the most critical contemporary challenges of our nation. And it is both a cause and effect of the conditions of squalor, disease, and misery that millions of our people live in. The good news is that it can be solved. The good news is that poverty can be eradicated. One of the major philosophical arguments that arose in the drafting of the ABC manifesto was the issue of how to eradicate poverty. The view that prevailed was that we had to intentionally address the creation of economic opportunities for the bottom of the pyramid, for the poorest. The idea that by promoting formal sector businesses alone and hope that as they grow, they'll provide jobs for the millions is unrealistic. In any event,
in which hides our poor is about 60% of our GDP. And I just want to take a moment to explain this. There have been conflicting arguments about this issue. Some argue that the best way to deal with poverty is by strengthening formal businesses, creating the environment for businesses to thrive, especially big businesses to thrive. And that we hope that when those businesses thrive, they'll create enough jobs for the millions of the poor people that we have. The question, of course, is that has not always been the case. Our population growth is already outstripping economic growth. Our population growth, as you know, is almost over 3%. And economic growth today is certainly under 3%. And by 2050, we'll be the third largest population, we'll have the third largest population in the world. Three issues are crucial then to resolving the poverty problem. The first is education. The second is healthcare. The third is the provision of jobs. Education, especially relevant education, is the surest pathway out of poverty. The immediate challenge is to resolve some of the crises in that sector. The outrageous number of out-of-school children, about 10 million, and these include, to quote Professor Imam, the children of the pastoralist communities who are spread across the country. They are Marjorie and the girl child, found predominantly in the north, the out-of-school boys in the southwest and southeast, as well as the children of migrant fishermen in the south-south. In addition, there's a growing number of migrant farmer children in parts of Ebonyi, Ekiti, and Ondo states, and more recently, children displaced by the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast. There's also the problem of poorly trained and poorly remunerated teachers and low investment in education at both national and subnational levels. So there is a crucial need to address the following, to address all of these issues by a mass youth and adult literacy program, leveraging radio and electronic and mobile platforms, comprehensive educational curriculum, including science, technology, engineering, and maths, the so-called STEM subjects, and technical and vocational and educational training, teacher education, capacity building, and professional development. These are issues that must be addressed, and of course we do not have any time to take those issues pointedly today. But these are issues that must be addressed. At the last meeting of the National Economic Council, which of course, as you know, is a council involving all of the state governments, we had a full discussion on these issues on education and how to deal with the educational challenge. Nigeria struggles today, before I leave the point, Nigeria, one of the major problems that we have, of course, is how to ensure that our adult population that is even illiterate is also made literate, and how to ensure that our growing youth population that is illiterate is somehow made literate. There's no way we can do it without technology. It's very clear that we need technology. We need to use all the possible mobile platforms, electronic platforms we have, and some of those experiments and some of those things are already going on. At least I know that at the Federal Ministry of Education, there's a lot of work going on about how to use radio and how to use mobile platforms for mass education. There's a need to focus, to spend time and put resources behind education, not just at the federal level, but in particular at the state level, because as you know, the states have, the states primarily have the duty to ensure that education, especially at the primary and secondary level, is funded. That is really the province of state authority. Federal government does not run primary schools and doesn't run secondary schools except the unity schools. So this falls purely within state competence. Most of the problems that we have, are solvable. But perhaps it's also important for us to talk about the public health challenges that we have, and just to talk very briefly about public health or healthcare. The good news, of course, is that most of the problems with our healthcare system are also solvable. And it is better funding and more deliberately targeted preventive healthcare. Take two significant diseases, malaria and AIDS. Malaria is one of the most important public health problems in the world. As of 2014, Nigeria accounted for about 29% of global malaria deaths. And malaria is responsible for approximately 60% of outpatient visits to our hospitals and 30% of admissions. It's also believed to contribute to up to 11% of maternal mortality, 25% of infant mortality, and 30% of under 5 mortality. It's estimated that about 110 million clinically diagnosed cases of malaria and nearly 300,000 malaria-related childhood deaths occur each year. The disease overburdens our already weakened health system and exerts severe social and economic burden on the nation, retarding our GDP by 30% annually and costing approximately 480 billion naira in out-of-pocket expenses for treatment, prevention costs, and loss of man hours. Nigeria has the second largest HIV epidemic in the world. Although HIV prevalence, and this is an important point to make, among adults is much less, it's just 2.9%. Other sub-Saharan African countries such as South Africa has 18.9%, Zambia has 12.4%. But the point is that in absolute numbers, because we have more people, Nigeria has more people who have HIV, there's more prevalence in absolute numbers than anywhere else, certainly anywhere else in Africa. But actual prevalence, actual occurrence is lower than in most parts of Africa. So the eradication of malaria and prevention of and containment of AIDS will be major economic milestones. The cost of diseases, the cost of these diseases, these preventable diseases, if we can work on those preventable diseases, it will be a major milestone for us economically. The issue is that we must increase the aggregate national health expenditure. In 2017, the health budget of all of the 36 states put together was a little above 332 billion naira, which is just about 4.9% of total budget size. This year, only one state has met the 15% target of the Abuja Conference the Africa Union Conference, where it was agreed that at least 15% of annual budgets will be committed to improving healthcare, especially subnational budgets. States must ramp up their spend. This year, for the first time, with the active collaboration of the National Assembly, we have met the 1% national budget, 1% of our national budget prescribed by the National Health Act for healthcare costs. So for the first time, we'll be meeting that 1%, the 1% set by law. But perhaps more importantly, it's time for compulsory health insurance. The huge out-of-pocket expenses for malaria treatment make it clear that we need health insurance. Every state can have its own. This is an important conversation for the executive and the legislature to have while setting a legislative agenda. So there's no question at all that we must ensure that we spend more on healthcare, just as we must spend more on education. So how do we deal with the job creation issue? As I mentioned earlier, our party, the APC, realized that we simply had to adopt a bottom-up economic model, one where government directly intervenes by a massive social investment program in matters of poverty, and this sort of program addresses the youth, especially graduate employment, and credit to small businesses, but especially credit to the bread or plantain seller, or the Meshai. This is the largest segment of our working population. These people, the smallest traders, these petty traders, their inventory is usually no more than between 5,000 and 10,000 naira. But they are an important part of the value chain of most goods that they sell. They are the ones who sell the single sachets of soap, of sugar, of spices for the largest numbers of our people. But they are forgotten and ignored in the economic plans and budgets, and because they are considered too unwieldy and too risky for microcredit loans. One of the reasons why our poverty figures are high is because of our large informal sector consisting of the petty traders whose income does not fit into the extreme poverty bracket, but they are counted in the number because there is no way of tracking them or their income. The plan of the federal government is to expand our microcredit program to give smaller credits to this group, eventually open bank accounts, what is called the government savings account, GSA. And by giving credit to them, it can replenish and increase their inventories and give them a stronger chance to earn more while they also service the value chain that they are part of. But more importantly, we bring them into the formal sector where they have access to government and private credit, and we lift more permanently out of poverty. This is an important part of the economic growth plan, and we believe that next month, July, we should begin the smallest microcredit, giving microcredit to the bottom of the pyramid. It's a very interesting process. We have working with us most of the major banks, and we're also working with some of the telcos and payment companies. We think that it will be an important game changer in terms of the way that we approach our economy, the way that we approach economic planning in our country. For youth unemployment, we believe that creating an environment for business and industry to take off and provide jobs for government, that government has to intervene. The government has to intervene, especially with the unemployed graduates. So our Empower program, where we engaged over 200,000 graduates, and we'll be engaging another 300,000 in July, is the largest post-tertiary jobs program in Africa. All of the volunteers are given electronic tablets, which has an extensive training and capacity building resource inside it. We now know that we can train large numbers of people electronically. And I want to just also mention that the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, which was established by this House of Assembly in 2016, is an excellent example of state intervention in creating opportunities for small businesses. As of May 2018, this year, 7,000 loans totaling about 5 billion naira have already been given out, and 12,500 jobs have been created or were created even within the first 6 months of its operation. We think that this is a very important initiative of the state government, and we think that it is important because it understands and addresses the concerns of an important segment of our society, the young, bright minds, that requires some capital to be able to just multiply their ideas and multiply their thoughts. The homegrown school feeding program is another important program which we do in collaboration with the state governments. And here in this homegrown school feeding program, we feed 8.2 million children daily. We engage over 70,000 cooks and patronize farm products in every state where the program runs. It is both a direct job creation scheme as well as a health program for children in public primary schools. The program is an important collaboration between federal and state government, and plans have already been concluded with the Lagos State government to commence the program in primary schools in Lagos State. Nigeria's economic growth will depend largely on the successes of local businesses. While the federal government has substantial responsibility for creating an environment for ease of doing business, because all businesses take place in states, the active collaboration of states through the legislature and the executive is crucial. How? We need to speed up the processes for securing title to land. Fortunately, we've worked with our very dynamic and able governor to ensure that this happens in this state. This is the state that everybody looks to for commercial activity. So speeding up the process of title to documents, speeding up business permits, etc., is crucial. And one of the very important things that His Excellency the Governor has done is to work collaboratively with the federal government in order to ensure that this is done. This has helped us greatly in moving up in the ease of doing business rankings of the World Bank. So I'd like us to commend His Excellency for supporting us in that way. At the National Economic Council, we have agreed also to collaborate to ensure that we have uniform fees for the installation of pipes and cables for broadband infrastructure. This is absolutely important because broadband infrastructure is the next level of infrastructure that we need for the kind of growth that we must experience. Without broadband infrastructure, we'll be miles and years behind our competitors anywhere else in the world. And we can't afford to have problems with people who want to install infrastructure that is crucial for the next level of our economic development. And gladly, all of the governors agreed that we need to watch the costs and that we all need to agree on sensible costs for doing so. We must also avoid impunity in tax legislation, especially by agencies, tax imposition by agencies. For medium to small scale businesses, small claims courts, fast track courts, and ADR are important. The Lagos State Judiciary has, as usual, set the pace in these important adjudicatory reforms. And I must say that what the Lagos State government has done, as Lagos State Judiciary has done, with the small claims courts, with the fast track courts, and all of that, has set in a very busy commercial environment such as we have. So again, the Lagos State Judiciary and Lagos State government have have really gone way ahead of others and created the exemplary institutions that we all want to see. I want to say as we close, I want to say as I close that the issue of security is one that, of course, is crucial, not just for all of our people, but is possibly the most important function of government. There is no way that we can possibly expect to have commercial activity, expect to have social activity in a way that will be satisfactory or in a way that will be safe if we cannot guarantee security. But in guaranteeing security, the role of governments, the role of the state governments, the role of the state judiciaries and legislature are crucial. The federal government, of course, has the overarching role of ensuring that the police work, that the army do their jobs, and that the other security agencies do their jobs. But we have argued repeatedly, and I believe that is the position of our party, that you cannot police a country of this size with a police command that functions out of Abuja. It's just impossible. You must have a state police. You must have community policing. And the reason why that is so obvious, the reason why it's so obvious is that policing is always a local function. Anyone who is a policeman must be able to speak the local language. He must understand the local language. If a policeman does not understand the local language, he stands at a major disadvantage. And this is the reason why the state police is important, why local policing is important as part of our security architecture. Some of what we have seen in many parts of the country, where we have had herdsmen killings and clashes with farmers and all of that. And the slow responses of the security agencies has been on account of the fact that local policing is weak, and that policing in those areas is weak. If you look at the local government in Benue State, for instance, it's on the borders, it's far away. The number of policemen that are stationed there, and are stationed in several local governments, is far too small to contain the sorts of challenges that we may have there. You must have special forces, you must have joint task forces in order to maintain peace there. But how is that possible in several local governments across the country? The only solution that we can prefer, therefore, is some form of local policing.